Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Paul Aurand, and he's going to tell us about his near-death experience. You were hit by lightning?
That's right. I don't recommend it, but that's what happened.
And it was so strange. Like it was like beautiful out and it came up out of a storm drain or something.
Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, I'm much more informed about lightning now than I was then, of course. And we were at my son's swim meet at a lake swimming competition. And the lifeguards postponed the starting of the competition for 15 or 20 minutes because they heard thunder in the distance. Sunny day, no sign of storm or rain. And it seemed I was sort of annoyed that they delayed it. And then they delayed it a second time because they heard thunder again. But there, you couldn't see it. And my youngest son got kind of antsy and wanted to go home. So I was walking up towards the car to put our cooler and our beach chairs and things into the back of the car. And while it was still sunny, out of nowhere, the whole world exploded. There was just a flash of brightest light you could ever imagine. And I thought a bomb had gone off. It was just an explosion. You know how loud lightning can be. I didn't know it was lightning or thunder. But that's what it was. And it was right by us. It hit a tree next to the car. It traveled through the tree, through the roots. And bystanders told us later that they could see tentacles of lightning coming up out of the storm drain that I was standing right in front of. It hit me. I was wearing a baseball cap. You know, they have these little metal kind of beanie on the top. So it blew the baseball cap off my head. They said it looked kind of like a cartoon. I still have a funny burn spot on my head from it 20 years later. Traveled through me into the car, traveled out the front of the car as a ball lightning. It hit another person, knocked another person down. And because I wasn't aware of it at the time, all I knew when all that was happening, you know, people who have near-death experiences talk about time slowing down. I didn't know this then either, but it was like slow motion. I was being electrocuted by 150 million volts of electricity, and my whole body went rigid and kind of bounced in the street, if you will. And I was wondering, I knew I was being electrocuted, but I didn't know how or why. And I could feel the electricity go up my legs, and I began to convulse. And I was thinking, I shouldn't be able to be electrocuted because I'm insulated. I'm standing in rubber sandals. And I could see overhead, although I couldn't really tilt my head, I could see overhead there were power lines, and wondered if the electricity was coming from the power lines. But no, it wasn't. They said it came out of the storm drain, went up my legs. There were what they call feather burns up my legs, actually went inside of my body and out my hand into the car. And as I know now, often people who are killed by lightning are killed because when it stops, you get thrown. And people saw me fly and land on my head. I went sort of up and down. And then there's this period of, I guess, about 10 minutes that I'm unconscious, unaware. And a huge storm arrived. Hail, pouring rain, wind, trees down, telephone lines out. And I become more conscious, and I'm in 1.5 or 2 feet of water. Someone's approaching me to try to help me. And I hear people shouting, no, don't touch him, because they have some misbelief that they're going to get electrocuted too, which can be true if it's a power line, but of course it wasn't. People are trying to call the ambulance and police, but the phones aren't working because power's out. Back in the days of wired phones, right? And cell phones weren't working either. Finally, they got hold of the police and ambulance, but it took almost 45 minutes for them to arrive. Wow. Because the roads were closed because there were so many trees down. EMTs don't really know what to do with someone who survives lightning. Not their fault. It's not so common. I was pretty much paralyzed on one side of my body. Couldn't talk at first. They got me into the ambulance and took me to the hospital. The doctor there really, I mean, they know how to deal with electric shock damage or trauma, but lightning, he didn't really know what to do. Blood tests, urine tests, all kinds of EKG, heart test, right? And eventually released me from the hospital. There were news teams outside because it was a kind of a curious thing for people. They kind of snuck me out the back and sent me home. And no one said, don't drive. I mean, I couldn't, even if I wanted to. People took me to the car, but the lightning had burned out the wiring in the car. So the car wasn't functional, had to be towed later. And someone brought me home. And next morning, I felt like a team of dump trucks had driven over me. My whole body ached so much. I was pretty out of it mentally, emotionally. And I called my insurance company. At the time, I had insurance that if you didn't report an emergency room visit within 24 hours, then they didn't have to cover it.
Oh.
So I called the insurance company and they put me on hold for the longest time and finally came back on and said, you shouldn't be home. You should be in the hospital. We want you to go to the emergency room. And when my insurance company said they wanted me to go to the emergency room, usually they don't really want you to go, right?
Right.
I knew something must be really wrong. So I got to another hospital and they did some more tests. And I was a bit of a curiosity. People were sort of wondering what the effects were. But I checked out pretty much okay, and they released me. I had more long-term problems from it that showed up in a few months, right? And I didn't know that I'd had an NDE. I didn't really know what an NDE was. I knew something was profoundly different in me, and I knew that the things that seemed important in my daily life didn't seem so important anymore. I think I had a higher, well, I knew I came close to death, right? And so I think your values change from that. But after struggling then for about 6 months with some other physical problems that were related to being electrocuted and a surgery to repair that, I had a regression session with someone who took me back to, he didn't intentionally take me back to NDE, although that's where I ended up. But he took me back to release the trauma from my body, because I held a lot of trauma in the body, as many of us do, near-death experience or not. And it was in the process of releasing that trauma from the body that I began to remember and relive what happened in that missing time when my body was laying in the gutter by the drain in that water. And that's been the real gift from the whole thing, is remembering what happened in that time. Not just remembering, but it's more of a re-experiencing of it, I'd say. And so, you know, when someone has a near-death experience, there's usually so much trauma involved in it that either from the trauma itself, you forget what happens, or from the treatment. Some of the medications they use, especially for heart failure, induce amnesia. It's a known side effect from the medication. And people don't remember what happens in that time. And when those memories came back, first was my body's laying there dead, but I'm conscious. I can't move my body. I can't speak, but I'm not in my body either. And I think the realization or the knowing that I'm more than my body, that my consciousness continues, is profoundly life-changing.
Right.
And it's not a religious experience, but it's a very profoundly spiritual experience, transcendent experience. And knowing that, well, that body doesn't work anymore, and then moving away, in my case, rather quickly from the body and going to what many near-death experiencers talk about, the light, right? I think everyone's experiences in a somewhat similar and yet personal way. And being welcomed into a place that, unlike life on earth, is unconditionally loving. And it's hard to, I mean, that word has different meanings for different people, I suppose, but it wasn't a concept of love. It was an experience of being so completely and totally loved that I came back from that experience wishing that everyone could have that experience. Everyone could know that somehow could I find a way to have other people experience that as well. It's beyond human love, right? Complete and total acceptance and unconditional love. We can be very judging of ourselves or other people. I know I can be, less so now, but it's profoundly changing. Healing, expanding, transformation. And I think if you read a spiritual book, if you have that inclination, you can read about oneness, that we're all one, we're all connected. But that was one of the other profound things that happened for me, is an experience of both becoming one with universal life force, if you will. And it's hard to describe, but I had a sense of self, but no sense of separation whatsoever. That I was a part of, and I am all things at the same time. Does that make sense to you?
I try to understand that because I personally have not felt that.
Mm. Mm. So it changed my perspective of life on Earth and people. Make me more or less judgmental, more accepting, more understanding. And I think that it's easy to feel isolated or alone in the world, or different, or unaccepted, or unloved. But this was an experience of being a part of all things, nature and human. I mean, and I had the experience of becoming part of the whole and one, and I had the experience of becoming separate from that. And I think that's something that we as humans live with as a kind of a core wound, or something we struggle with, is feeling separate. And so that feeling part of all was really profound and healing.
I never thought about it before, but you said that. We talk about everybody, kids trying to belong in school, or, careers trying to belong in society. And it is just that innate feeling of trying to be part of that whole.
Yeah.
In weird ways, in wrong ways that don't work.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that came from all of this for me was understanding that as much as I'm a human being with an ego and a human mind and a human personality, that there's much more to me than that. And there is I call it soul self, or in my book, I call it soul essence. And my soul self has its own qualities, its own nature, and is aware of what it is I'm here on earth to do, to accomplish and learn. Whereas my human self, my ego, isn't always aware of that. And it took me years, really, after my near-death experience to learn how to work and integrate both this human self and soul self. Right. So I think that's one of the greatest awarenesses that came from me, besides the love and the oneness, is that I would be asked to do an interview like this, for instance. And my human self says, oh, no, I'm kind of shy. I'm kind of introverted. I don't want to be on a stage. I don't want to be on a screen. I don't, just kind of be quiet and stay in my own realm. And my soul says, yeah, that's what I'm here for. Do it. And so I'll find myself saying yes to interviews like this. And then my human self going, oh, what'd you get yourself into, right? So there's a, sorry, for a long time, there was a sort of a conflict between the two. They were a bit at odds, and both have their value, both have their place, and learning to work with and see the value and the qualities of each and how to integrate those has really made me a different person and made me more able to help other people recognize those differences in themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, some people might think, how do those people go on YouTube, in front of people and potentially millions and put themselves out there? But when you've had a near-death experience, your soul is like that. It sees the value, tells you to do it. You want to help others. It's like this message is bigger than we are. It's more important than our ego, our mind, what we look like, what we sound like. It's way more important than that. The message needs to be heard.
Absolutely. And the soul self isn't so happy if you're not doing it when you're supposed to be doing it, right? It's not pressure from society or somewhere else. It's more internal. And I think the more we can recognize what we're here to do and what we're here to learn, it makes life very, very different. I mean, it's like being hit by lightning. People offered many explanations about why that happened. Some said the devil is after you, right? Some said that's God whacking you up the side of the head. Some said that's because you didn't donate enough to some religious cause.
Wow.
Right? Some said it's a shamanic initiation, that some people actually intentionally attempt to be hit by lightning. Like I said, I wouldn't recommend that. But why? What is it? What was it for? What was it? So I don't know. I can't tell you why I got hit by lightning, but I can tell you what I've learned from it. And I think that with most challenges in life, we can look at them and say, did I manifest that? Is that retribution? Is that punishment? Is that reward? Is that, but I think it's easy to get stuck in the why. I think I would still be stuck in the why, but it's more like, well, what can I learn from this? How can I live differently? What can I gain? And how can I use that in my life or use that to live? I think it's hard for many when they have a near-death experience to come back to their human body and earth plane, knowing unconditional love, and then having to experience what happens commonly in our families or in our communities on this planet. And I think some actually become depressed and long for going back to spirit, right? But I had to say to myself, I'm here for something in this human body with this family on this planet. There must be something I'm to learn and something I'm to do and accomplish. And understanding what that is more clearly has given more purpose to my life, and I think benefited many others too.
And when we try to talk about it, it's literally like we're trying to create a foreign language and talking about a foreign country that people don't believe exists, and we sound foreign ourselves and don't know ourselves. Why am I saying this? This doesn't sound like of this earth or of reality or logic. And I think there's a a lot in learning to trust ourselves and our memories that goes into explaining our NDE and our after effects, because it's all up to us to do the soul work, the inner work, to find words and a place in our reality to put, I was out of my body, I was in a realm, I was, just to explain the unconditional love, like the oneness you felt to me, who I didn't had two NDEs, but I never have experienced the oneness. I hear a lot of people talk about it.
Yeah.
But, and you do keep a, part of yourself too, while you're in this other place. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, people like you were talking about it and putting it out there. And organizations like IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, right, is researching this and bringing together people that have had this experience, or people that are interested in this experience, or people that question it and are researching it and publishing information about it. But, Bruce Grayson, who founded that organization, is a psychiatrist, just recently retired. And he was asked by many of his patients that in time reported that they had an NDE. He asked the patients why they didn't tell him more about their experience. And their answer was, well, you were the psychiatrist in the hospital that was deciding whether or not I would be released from the hospital. And if I told you about my meeting Jesus, Buddha, my dead grandmother, you weren't going to let me out of there. So I just didn't say much till years later. He found people 3-5 years later would start talking. To this day, we were out to dinner the other night with people, acquaintances. And I don't know how we got there, but I started to talk about my near-death experience. You could see the kind of glazed look. It challenges people's beliefs about life. It challenges people's beliefs, religious beliefs. It challenges people's values, right? And many people think, oh, another nut, another weird kind of idea this guy has. Others are fascinated, right? And those who have an interest, I'm happy to talk to. And those who wonder if maybe they had an experience, because not everyone remembers. As I said, from the trauma or from the medications used, there can be a forgetting. And I think there's real value in helping people remember what happened when they were in coma, what happened when they were pronounced dead, what happened when they were in that car accident, in that sort of in-between time.
And doctors turning a blind eye to this and their arrogance is actually not beneficial, because there's, me included, people that had NDEs that if we would have been able to tell our doctor, it could have saved our life, because it's a indication impending death is upon us. When medical tests may not show any sign of any problem, like I had a ectopic pregnancy and my doctor had done a ultrasound a couple weeks prior in his office. And so when I come to the hospital and I tell him it's an ectopic pregnancy, I could not tell him how I knew it, because I just died in the hallway in the emergency room. I had a heaven experience. I couldn't say that, of course. Never heard of NDE back in 1986, but I knew I was just dead in heaven and trying to accept it. And now I'm back. And my doctor is saying, I did ultrasound earlier. Both babies, I was pregnant for twins, are in the uterus. It's not ectopic. Why do you keep saying that? And he looked at me like I was weird. And he looked at my husband like, what's wrong with her? My husband shrugged his shoulders, and he was going to discharge me. And I sat there quiet and I thought, if I go home, my sons are going to find me dead in the morning, and I'm not going to have that. My only choice is either discharge and that happen, or I convince him to admit me, so I'll die here and my husband will just get a phone call.
Mm.
And so that was my only choices. So I said, well, I'm not going home. And he said, well, if it make you feel better, since you live an hour away, I can admit you overnight. And, so he walked away shaking his head. And, my husband went home and they put me in a private room. And I continued all night to wake up and feel this pain in my right hip bone. I'd sit up, get my blue bowl. I'd wake up, had been passed out. I got vomit everywhere but my bowl. And when I told this was on Dr. Oz, he said, every time you passed out, you died. And I
Uh-huh.
knew that. I never had another NDE, but after so many times of doing that, I realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm not passing out. I'm dying every time here. And I said a
Mm-hmm.
prayer. I said, God, I know you can't keep bringing me back, but please keep me alive till morning. Maybe my doctor will come in early and realize I've been passing out all night, and do another ultrasound or do one just to prove to me I'm crazy. I don't have an ectopic, whatever reason. And so that's what happened. That's when he come in the next morning and did ultrasound and found I had the biggest two pregnancy hospital ever saw. I had one baby in the uterus, one was in the
Oh
tube.
my.
And so I had internal bleeding fill my entire abdominal cavity clear up to my chest. So, and if that would have happened today, I think would someone who had knowledge of NDEs be able to say, excuse me, doctor, I know your tests say I'm fine, whether it's the person that's flying over the emergency room on the way to the emergency room, you hear those stories, or walking around the halls and they're supposed to be in the hospital bed. If people knew what these meant, they could tell the hospital staff, their doctor, whoever, and say, I think we need to do more tests here because I have one of those things they call near-death experiences. That means I'm close to death. And if doctors would listen and understand these instead of rolling their eyes and don't want to hear it, they're not real, then they could realize this is a symptom, no different than high blood pressure or anything else. It's a symptom of impending death. So just do another test. Keep them a little longer. Keep an extra eye. If they would stop rolling their eyes,
Mm.
because these could, because I've had so many NDErs be in the hospital or about to be discharged or was discharged and went home and died, had another NDE, or that's when they had their NDE. And if they could have known what it was and not been embarrassed or afraid to tell, and if a doctor or nurse would have acknowledged that, oh, this could be impending death. I have said, nobody listens to me, but if they could do something where just add one question in triage, or
Mhm.
when you go to your doctor, when they ask different questions, I know my husband here lately has been having a lot of appointments and they always ask the same questions. Have you had, are you out of breath after climbing stairs? These sort of, have you had dizziness? Have you had when sitting up, whatever. These random health questions they ask because they know these are indicators of serious problem. If they could just add one question, have you had a spiritual experience lately? A feeling
Mhm.
of out of body or, religious experience, something, just some quick question where someone might even not even heard of NDE, or maybe they're wanting to tell it or afraid, that they would say, yeah, during the night, I've been having dreams that I'm out of my body or that I'm with talking to Jesus. Maybe they got sleep apnea. Maybe they got a heart condition they don't know about. What would it hurt? Because there's millions of people having near-death experiences. And there's so many that have, that were sent home and something wasn't caught and they die. The people have been to East come back and say, and they sent me home. And when I was home, then they had to call the squad because something happened. It just could be an indicator.
Yeah,
That's my little
I think
spiel.
it's a
So
brilliant idea. And I think, and when was your experience?
I drowned when I was 5 and in 1966, and my ectopic pregnancy, I was 25 in 1986.
Mhm. So honestly, I think that we've made some progress. There are more and more emergency room nurses, especially, and doctors that are beginning to ask these questions now. I think, do you know Jeff O'Driscoll?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was an emergency room, or is emergency room physician that started asking these questions because of a particular experience that he had, who's written about it, published about it. It's happening more and more. It's a matter of education, really. It doesn't necessarily fit the medical model, but it's a valid question that can and needs to be asked. But I know that we've come further than where we were when you had your experience or when I did.
I think his
Um,
book is called Not Yet,
yeah,
because a lot of people that had NDEs or, close to death were saying not yet, like they weren't
yeah,
ready to go yet.
yeah, yeah. And there's a cardiologist up in Eastern Canada that I did a pilot study program with 10 cardiac arrest patients who had all been resuscitated. So they were clinically, medically dead for between 1 and 2 minutes to one was almost an hour or a little over an hour, actually. Um, and we regressed them back to that time that they were out of their body and the emergency teams were working on them to resuscitate them. And it's absolutely flabbergasting the details that they can tell you about things that happened while they were dead that they had no way of knowing.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd like to see more research in this field as well, because it's very clear that consciousness continues. And that's something that medicine is reconsidering now too, the definition of death, right? We're realizing that there's much more activity going on even once the brain stops functioning and the breathing stops.
When
Right?
I drowned when I was 5, it was all the out of body experience. I had already put
Mm-hmm.
on. I saw my mom and sister and where they were sitting, my brother, what he was doing. And after my tubal pregnancy in 86, one night I was looking up at the night sky, just trying to unstress, and all of a sudden I remembered the drowning from front to back.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to my mom, like, did I drown when I was little? I told her where she sat and where my sister sat and what they were doing and my brother. And I didn't remember the rescue. So I only had two questions at that time at 25 years
Mm-hmm.
old was, did I drown when I was little? And how did you find me?
Mm-hmm.
But to have that memory, and it's so strange to be alive and know what it's like to be a ghost.
Yeah.
And because my husband was like, don't say ghost, that sounds weird. I said, what else would you call it? Because I was roaming around doing stuff, exploring,
Yeah.
and I felt so silly telling it because when I tell it, I'm telling it from a 5-year-old's perspective. My language and
Mm-hmm.
everything changes.
Yeah.
Um, and at 25, when I tell that, I start getting kind of cocky like I was at 25.
Mm-hmm.
I just start telling it from that perspective. And but yeah. So yeah,
My
things that
wife.
can be verified like that, that they can't dispute
Mm-hmm.
that this is a hallucination.
Yeah. My wife had her first near-death experience when she was very young. She had typhus. And they didn't know what it was with the fever and infection. She had a near-death experience. Of course, the child doesn't know these terms, but as a result, became quite an empath, quite sensitive spiritually, and able to see. You talk about ghosts, that's what made me think of it. She could see the dead, if you will. She could see spirits. She could see souls of other people that weren't in body. And being so young, she didn't know that everybody couldn't see that. And she began talking about grandmother, grandfather, this one, that one. And it didn't go well for her. She ended up kids bullying her, beating her up because she was too weird, and ended up in a psychiatrist's office because she was talking about things people didn't understand. But the fact is, she was just opened up spiritually from the NDE that she had. And this is true for many people. And when you're young, you don't know. You don't know. And people would say, oh, just don't talk about that. But she didn't know that everybody couldn't see them.
And I wish we could start to identify those students
Mm,
in school,
yeah.
that realize that this is a gifted student in a spiritual way and not like me. I was always staring out the window, daydreaming. It was just kind of like, wanted to be free and explore, and instead of focus on words. It was really hard. Like the whole time my guest talk, I'm sitting here taking notes because like I have to catch it like a net, catch the words because my mind just wants to wonder. And so I started when I started college, like I got to sit and write down every word everybody says because I tend to wonder.
Well, that's something that we see happen is that when someone has a near-death experience, I think the likelihood of having another one, either an out-of-body experience or an NDE, is much greater. It seems to me that once we've been out of our bodies, we're no longer so wrapped in them, and we're more, I'd say, loosely connected with it. And so it's easier for certain things to sort of send us out, or for us to intentionally learn to be more free of it. And I don't mean to die, but I mean to be not so limited by the human brain's awareness or consciousness. Eben Alexander talks about this greatly expanded consciousness that he experienced during his NDE. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts of an NDE is not being limited by your human mind. You have a consciousness that's much greater than that and a very different perspective of things. And I think knowing that we can achieve these more expanded states of consciousness is really important. And then doing it intentionally, not by having the trauma that sends us out, but by learning to expand our consciousness beyond limitations of the mental mind can put us in touch with the kind of wisdom that goes beyond intellect.
And I guess it would be such a hard thing to study because like when I've had things happen like through intense prayer, one time intense prayer week before my second NDE the topic, it was Easter Sunday and I was out here on a property and I heard my son yell, and I won't go into the whole thing, but my other son was drowning in the creek. And I was praying so hard because my other son yelled something, Mom, Jeremy. And my husband went to look and I was frozen in fear and I'm praying. And all of a sudden it was like I was hovering over the field and I had this knowing, which I call out body, like the land of knowing. And I tried to understand all this then. I didn't know what was happening, I was just scared. And all of a sudden I knew it was like something was informing me. Okay, the creek has only been ankle deep, like he couldn't have drowned, I'm thinking. But then something informs me, this knowing that, but we've had a lot of melting snow and a lot of rain, and the creek is high and swift, and Jeremy's trying to swim. And so suddenly I said, Jeremy, stand up. It's not that deep, walk out of there. And then later I seen him walk up to me. He's like, Mom, was you worried about me? He's 5. When he was 20, I told that story for the first time. I was just so scared and I was praying. Jeremy was drowned in that creek. Jeremy walks out of the kitchen and he said, Mom, I heard you praying. He says, that's what it was. I was trying to swim. And I heard you say, Jeremy, stand up, calm down. It's not that deep. Walk out of there. And everybody, was just like shocked. And I'm like shocked, like, what? He heard me praying? Like, and now that he's older, he's in his 40s, he told me recently, and I never heard him say this because we didn't talk about that much, because he's an accountant for the federal government and stuff, he's not really into this, but he said, Mom, he says, it was like I was a drone. I was hovering above and I seen you down there praying. And so how did he see me? How did he hear me? I said, Jeremy, that's in your death experience. Well, I don't know about that. Well, so but when I heard that he heard me praying, that's what really got me thinking, are all these memories I have real? The drowning NDE, the ectopic NDE. When I was 16, I was kidnapped and raped, and I was praying really hard. I wish I wouldn't even on this earth. Suddenly I'm in space looking down to earth and have this experience. And I see I have my body and my hair and everything. And like you said, once we've had NDE, and I think maybe especially as a child, I don't know, that we can at will, like not our will, but feels to me like God's will, allow us to leave? Or is it something, like you say, it's just easier now? But when you're a kid, you don't know how, because when I come back at 16 from that experience, immediately I thought, what was that, a wish come true? Was that a prayer answered? Or do I have a skill? did God do it? Did I do it? And so if we could have some kind of university that just studies this, and is able to cut off the bull crap, because there is a lot of bull crap. There are fakes. There are maybe people that don't remember right, or they create a memory, find a way to get down to the meat and work with that, and then study, can we do this? Because my feeling is if I can save my son through prayer, I want everybody to learn how to do this. If someone is about to be raped or in a really bad situation they can't get out of, how do they leave their body and expand and move like a ghost, through their soul? Can we go to somewhere else, like the what do you call it, like where the military, I guess, remote viewing, where they can go and to another country just by sitting here in this chair and get into that state and travel? Because that would be a really handy thing to have if they would stop rolling their eyes and seriously start doing studies.
I think that if you understand that it isn't that you're dead or alive, it's not sort of either or, there's a lot of in between. And if you look at people that have PTSD, right, people that have had trauma in their life, they often learn to dissociate from their body. That's how they survive the severe physical or mental or emotional pain, is by detaching from their body. And that survival strategy can be problematic because when you want to be present and aware, you sometimes are out and not very aware, like you're talking about. But if you don't think of it as such an extreme, black or white, yes or no, dead or alive, that you're either more present and connected or to varying degrees disconnected. So the first stages are dissociation, and there's different degrees of dissociation. And as dissociation goes further, it becomes OBE, out of body experience. And even further than that, from the body, from human existence, is near-death experience, right? And if you talk to near-death experiencers, some reach this sort of threshold place and then usually get the message, no, it's not your time, go back. Or someone will greet them even before that and say, not your time, go back. Or they're so afraid of leaving that they don't go very far back. Depends some on the condition of the physical body as well. But it's very in flux, or there's a flow of it. And we see it too. I do regressions for people to help remember their soul self. And one place we take someone is in utero, so that the human body is developing their mother's womb, and their soul is coming into the body, preparing to come to be born. And there you can dialogue with both the developing body and the soul, where the soul still has memory and intention about coming and what it wants to learn and do. But it's an experience for the individual being regressed in utero to reconnect with their soul nature and say, oh, that's why I feel drawn to do certain things or be certain ways, or that's why I came. And, I really wanted to have these life experiences that were rather challenging and as a human, but that was something my soul really, really wanted to have. And I think it helps us remember that we're more than this human body, that we have a soul or a spirit or a consciousness that comes into it with great intention. And going back to where we still remember what that is, and recover that, and then being able to live with that intention is really valuable, I guess I would say.
Yeah. It seems
you talked about how to achieve that state. Sorry.
Yeah, good.
But I really searched after my experience about how to recreate that without the trauma, leaving the body. So Monroe Institute is doing training people to do out-of-body experiences. Some are able to do that, some not. But Michael Newton, who developed the life between life regression, worked for 30 years. He worked with over 7,000 people. He really researched a method of taking people back to before their life is the human being that they are now, and to remember and re-experience themselves as the soul being they are. And I think it's a very effective methodology that most people are able to experience, and it can be quite life-changing to remember previous existences as well as why you came and what you came to do.
I've had people interview me on the radio about NDEs, and several times I've been asked, how can someone have an NDE when they're newborn? Or they say they remember being an incubator. Like, how is that possible? They're not even old enough to. And I said, my belief is, I think that these are soul memories. When we have an NDE, our soul is remembering. We're not using our brain. We're out of our body. So I believe that when we're in the soul, things happen, and then remember it, and we're back in our body, that it's outside of the brain. And so they're going to never fade. I mean, we may forget them. We may push them away, like we're not ready to face them, like you were, like my drowning. But when it comes back, it's back forever. Like, it never changes. It can get more detailed as we allow it to come forward. But it's that perfect space that we were in, that like it can't be denied or forgotten. Someone asked me, what about people with Alzheimer's, dementia? Are they going to be able to remember their NDEs? I said, that'd be interesting to find out. Like, those of us talk about our NDEs, and some of us get dementia. Will that NDE be still just as clear and crisp? We'll be able to have the language to, I don't know.
Yeah, my mother died not so long ago with Lewy body Alzheimer's, and she, in the end, couldn't really communicate. And it was very clear from my perspective that there were times where she would suddenly, and most people will tell you about this, that they suddenly become lucid. They kind of remember things, or they communicate, and then they're gone again. And it seemed to me that there were times where she was present in her body, and other times she was very far from it. It was like, my sense was she was testing the water. She was sort of moving away from the body into spirit, and then back in, and then back, sort of preparing us as well for her departure, as well as for her own kind of wondering, both of us wonder, what's on the other side, what's it like, right? And I think she was beginning to explore before she finally left. And I think that's part of the process of dying with Alzheimer's and dementia, is becoming less and less present in body, and sort of getting used to the other side. Again, I see it more often as a gradual process, as opposed to I'm here or I'm not, I'm alive or I'm dead.
I thought it was interesting when you were talking about your NDE, and you said something to the effect of, well, I didn't need that body anymore, so I left it. And that's, it can, and it's something I'll never forget, a 5-year-old drowning. Once I remembered it, that I didn't realize I was dead at first. At first, I thought my family lied to me. My parents lied to me. There's no such thing as drowning, because, I was afraid. I was fighting it and struggling and choking for nothing, because I'm fine now. And I couldn't wait to tell my siblings there's no such thing as drowning. They lied, because I didn't understand, because I hadn't left my body yet. I was still in the body. I would just drift down a little deeper in the water, and a fish would bump into me. And then I rose up out of my body. And then I realized, oh, and I heard a female voice say, don't go yet. If they find you soon, you might go back. And I remember so clearly saying, what is she talking about? Go back. That's not how death works. I mean, I can remember being that snotty little 5-year-old thinking this person's nuts. That's
Mm.
not how death works. I knew that much that you don't go
Yeah,
back. Like I thought dead was dead.
right.
And what you talk about, what you experienced, and then, what it's like for you, and then your wife, what she experienced, and then what her life was like, and mine, and everybody else has had NDEs. It seems to me as though what we experienced is what we come back with. So, your wife experienced what she did, and then now she sees spirits. And um, I think for me, I experienced that angel, and I experienced her right when I came
Mm.
back from dying too on the road. And then she appeared, and I saw her, and I was communicating with her. And then later, I remembered other communications and things with her. And so as I get older, I'm thinking, is that why I tend to take people under my wing?
Mm.
And I just take care of them, and I get these knowings about them and for them and to help them. And I've just seen this pattern throughout my life that I just do that instinctively.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that's exactly what it feels like. I feel like I'm literally taking this person
Mm.
under my wing, and
Mhm.
I'm like now assigned to be their angel for as long as they need me. And when they no longer need me, then, life goes on till the next. And I did that. I had 60 foster kids, mostly with therapeutic. We adopted 10. And it just seemed like one after the other. And I was, child protection, and, worked at a prison as a counselor, did all these fields. And I look back, and I was like, I was just taking one person under my wing, one after the other, one after the other. And it just comes so natural. And it sounds kind of egotistical, like, what does she think, she's an angel? No, but that's a good way of, I experience this communication with an angel off and on throughout my life.
Mhm.
And I feel like something works through me, like, okay, we're taking care of this one. And words come in, knowings that I would have no way of knowing. Like one time I walked in my mother-in-law's house, I looked at her legs, she said, oh, look what I did. She fell. It was just a bruise. And out of my mouth come wound care. I'm like, where'd that come from? I've never said wound
Mhm.
care for my life. She
Yeah.
ended up needing wound care. It didn't heal, and it was this big hole, and I had to take her to wound care. And then they started coming to the home to help her. And after so many times, whether anybody else believes, it's about what you believe and what you know about yourself, how you can help others through these gifts, which are all unique to each NDE.
Yeah. Well, we're really spiritual beings having a human experience, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when we remember that through a near-death experience or a close call, it's easier to live that, to know that and live that. And no, you're right. It doesn't come from ego. It's not egotistical. That's soul-tistical.
Yeah. Very interesting. My doctor, I was came to see him after the ectopic, and 30 years later, after the ectopic, I went to my checkups. I had my husband go with me. I said, today I'm going to tell him. And so after he examined me, I said, I want to tell you something for 30 years. And he said, well, you better tell me then. And the nurse is standing there beside him, and they're both looking at me. And so I told him the brief version of my NDE. I said, you remember my ectopic pregnancy? He's like, yeah. And, like I say, it was the biggest tool pregnancy they'd ever seen. It was, a pretty dramatic thing. So yeah, he
Painful. I
remembered.
can't imagine how you
And,
got through.
and so I told him the brief version of my NDE, and he said, I have come to believe in all my years of practice what you're telling me right there.
Mhm.
And the nurse says, oh, he does too. She says, we see it all the time.
Mhm.
And so I think the words he used was come to believe, you know,
Mhm.
and it's a shame that all these doctors that have come to believe can't voice this in those physician communities. Maybe if they would hear these examples, like Dr. Driscoll, what he's doing,
Mhm. Mhm.
if it could get out there more.
We're working on it. The cardiologist I worked with in Canada, he showed it on rounds. He presented our study, and they were so interested in it that they asked him to present it again to a bigger group of doctors. So I think we're making inroads. I think there's an interest and a curiosity, even though it doesn't necessarily fit in a box. I think there are many scientists, researchers, doctors that are curious and interested in this. And it's our job to get it out there more, doing what you're doing right here.
I was Googling NDEs a few weeks ago, and I come across 3 young doctors at Michigan, in a university, and they did some kind of speaking event on it. So I emailed each one, told them about my podcast, sent them a copy of my book, asked if anyone would want to come on and discuss. I haven't heard anything, and I'm sure I wouldn't by sending it because, they're doctors, and why would they speak to me? But I just wanted to have that information because you just never know. Something to consider because they're studying it from a medical viewpoint, which is great. And I don't know how to incorporate, like what you're doing is great, and those doctors, but I keep feeling like, as someone that does a podcast on NDEs, like, how do we go beyond the stories? Because there's got to be a point where that's what people are interested in, is the stories, but it's like at some point we got to get beyond the stories, the wow factor, and because now their NDEs are turning into ETs and UFOs, and so now everybody's NDEs involving ET and UFO, and whatever sells, whatever gets.
Is it really a trend? I didn't know.
It is a trend. Yep. And some NDE podcasts are going more in that direction because that's where the views are. And it's not about let's keep the focus on NDEs and research this and dive into it. It's about where the YouTube video views are.
Yeah.
And that's okay if that's what they do, that's them. And then there's other ones that are making themselves out to be a prophet and having prophetic visions because their YouTube channel is getting so big, that's going to make it bigger if people think they're God or the next Moses or something. And so they're going that direction. And so, I've tried to figure out where am I at in this, because I'm not going to take off on those tangents. And so I'm just going to stay where I'm at, who I am, and just continue to scratch at this. And
being true to yourself and what you're here for.
Yeah. So I'll put the link to our last interview from 2 years ago in the description. Tells more about you and your what you're doing. And I really appreciate that you went more into your NDE today, because we didn't get into that much on the last one. And the science around this. And I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And I'll get this sent out to you later today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Big hug. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.